So we appreciate each of you sharing today. And you know, part of our goal today is, again, to break down those barriers to stereotypes and stigma so that men and women, everyone really, don't have to suffer in silence. Each of you work for reputable organizations here throughout West Michigan. What have you noticed in your workplace, or how do you notice in your workplace that there are still stigma and stereotypes present associated with men and mental health?
Speaking for myself, it's changed significantly, and I think COVID was one of those drivers. It wasn't discussed much, or it wasn't recognized much prior to COVID, but I think COVID changed many of our perspectives, including the leaders of our companies, around the significance of mental health. And I think it's, as bad as COVID was, it made a change for the positive relative to how leaders of companies and your employees look at mental health.
I think we still struggle. I mean, like the panelists said before, there's still that masculine assumption that you need to be a leader. You don't want to show that you're vulnerable. Seeking help is challenging. So seeing a counselor, a lot of times when you have that suggestion, it can be men or women, but men in particular, they're not open to that. They don't want to see a counselor. They don't need support. They want to be that strength. And when you hold the emotion and it gets challenging, you can feel isolated and alone, and you don't realize when it's 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people, you're really not alone. That's a pretty high percentage of the population. So we still see that in our team.
I think kind of building off that a little bit too, we live in such a results-driven culture now that that's the expectation that you just deliver and deliver and deliver day after day. And I think especially with, I mean, it's, you know, men and women, but at the executive level, you see more often than not men in those kind of leadership positions. And the mindset that they have oftentimes is we need results, we need deliverables, we need, you know, data, et cetera, and they're not really thinking bigger picture about the mechanism that makes all of that work, which is the people. And I think that's something that certainly, and I'm still very junior in my career, I'm only 26 years old, so my experience may be a little bit different than others, but from what I've seen so far in at least the professional environment is there has been incremental improvement, but we do have a ways to go as well.
Sometimes it's just reading the room. Like maybe in a down economy, it's not appropriate to talk about delivering $26 million in sales.
As an executive, I'll tell you some of the tactics I've used in the past, and it sometimes isn't liked by my colleagues, but you got to recognize in the business I'm in, we make furniture. Okay? At the end of the day, it's furniture. It's not life-altering. Okay? You got to be vulnerable and let people know that's the case. We get it. It's stressful. We're working hard. We have goals to meet. We all work towards those goals. But at the end of the day, recognize that there's life beyond this place and life beyond furniture.
Do either of you ever see your own masculine tendencies get in the way or contribute to maybe some old held stereotypes and stigmas when it comes to your own mental health, or those that you work with, that, you know, I've just got to power through, I'll put this on the back burner, I'll worry about it later, and then you never get to it? Does your own masculinity get in the way sometimes?
I think it's a struggle when you go through, you know, I had some growth opportunities. I give my wife credit for that. She definitely helped me open up. You talk about emotions. And before, I always thought of being a leader as coming in and saying, hey, I'm overly optimistic and everything's going to be okay. Sales are down, COVID's happening, whatever it is, we're going to lead the charge and make it to the finish line. And it was interesting over the past years, and you grow up, you learn a little bit more, you learn about mental health, but exposing that you are anxious about things, that you do feel sad. It's times you can be down. It's interesting. I thought the team members that are on our team would look differently at you and maybe think less of you. And honestly, the opposite happened. They were more open to talk to you. We got in deeper conversations. You build some relationships. And so that was a good learning curve for myself.
Yeah, I think certainly, you know, I have my own tendencies to as you mentioned, just push things on and just try to get through the day by day. And especially when there are opportunities or situations where there's a rapid rate of change going on in an organization, you're kind of just in survival mode. And that survival mode is a really, for me, that's the critical piece or critical point where I can make a decision of, all right, this needs to be handled now, or maybe I can push this off, but then get to it and then set those deadlines, if you will, internally to revisit those conversations with yourself, with someone else. So I try to take that bias and the stereotype out of it, but certainly it's challenging to maintain that level of discipline to set yourself up for success that way.
I think what's interesting is when we do invite ourselves to have that conversation with others, and we recognize, like you said, Dominic, that they're all of a sudden they're open to talk to us about it, it's because they're probably wanting to have that conversation with somebody else, and we just created that opportunity to do that. So is that one of the ways that we can challenge and break down stigma and barriers for men in the workplace? Is just by having that conversation?
As a leader, absolutely. I've had 2 major mental health blowouts in my life. One was very recent. It was this holiday season. And the first time this happened, it was 24 years ago. I handled it differently. This time, with more wisdom, more knowledge, closer to the end of my career, I decided I needed to handle it differently this time. And as a leader, when I didn't come back from Christmas vacation, I had missed some days prior to Christmas, I knew people were wondering, where's John? So I made a choice when I came back, don't hide me. I was vulnerable with my team. I said, here's what happened. Here's what I struggled with. And it was very difficult, but the response I got was very surprising, much like you. All of a sudden, people are asking me, telling me about their struggles. And that was a form of invite, and I think leaders can play a huge role in that, but they have to be vulnerable and comfortable with being vulnerable.
I would agree with John. I think that's a huge aspect. If you have your leadership that's willing to be vulnerable and speak to that and talk about mental health and times that it's been challenging, it creates an open space for people to dialogue with you. And when you have that connection, honestly, and as a team, you care for each other, you advocate for each other, and hopefully, if you are results oriented, if you have a strong team, that helps produce your results.
John, I'm curious. You come back, you have that conversation with your team. It's well-received response. They come to you. They start talking about some of their own personal lives, and then the days happen, the weeks happen, the months have happened. What is that environment like now with that same team? Have you guys continued that, or how can you cultivate an environment in the workplace where that conversation is just routine?
A couple things. It did open a big door. Several people approached me, and I think some of them were just curious more than anything, and I talked them through it. But probably 2 or 3 of them, that conversation has continued. People I knew from my own recognition and noticed that they probably struggle with mental health as well. And it opened up that conversation with those folks, and we still have them today. One of them is struggling with an elder parent. My mother recently passed away. We have immense conversations about that. Other ones are struggling with anxiety and depression in their children. I have experience with that. So having those conversations with those folks, you won't get to everybody, but if you can only get to a few, you've made a dent.
How about you? Do the conversations continue?
Yeah, I think we regularly talk about it in our meetings. So if we have the team atmosphere, we just continue to bring up examples, stories, share some of those things so that door is kind of open. We're a small family store, so we walk around and see our employees, and it might just be somebody you kind of pass by and they tap you on the shoulder and you talk casually to them for a few minutes, but there's something they open up, and then you invite you to a bigger meeting. Hey, would you like to talk about that? And then really the empowerment, hey, would you be interested in seeing a counselor? And we have Mosaic as our EAP, and they're a great resource as far as, hey, I'm not an expert, but I at least know enough to get you to the person that can help you.
Nick, I know you said that you're younger in terms of this panel, but not in the journey that you spent a third of your life connected to the Be Nice Action Plan. as a young leader at Bissell, how or have you implemented some of that action plan into the workplace?
It's a great question. I think the best way I can answer it is on our HR team at Bissell, our VP always talks about, how can we create moments that matter in the workplace? And those moments that matter always start with a conversation. So we make a point to make meaningful connections with someone outside of our team on a daily basis. We're in a transitional period now where some of us are hybrid, some of us are in office, and some of us are fully remote. So that connection piece has been a challenge. But going out of your way to have a meaningful conversation, even if it's something simple as, providing a compliment to someone and just engaging them in that way. You can be a leader without being in a leadership position by acting in that manner. So I think it's important to, like I said, initiate those conversations, and part of what we do to create those moments that matter are going outside of our team and getting to know who we work with outside of our little bubbles.
Sounds like you just answered my last question here, but I'm going to give each of you the floor here to respond to this last question. Same as the first panel, you got a group of leaders here who are ready to take actionable steps to improve the mental health for both men and women in their workplace. What is one takeaway from your experience that you can give them to build and cultivate a safe conversation around mental health for men and women at work?
For me, it goes back to finding leaders that are willing to be vulnerable. If you work for an organization, the fact that you're here already tells me that your organization recognizes this as a problem. But it's a difficult to find. You need an advocate in your leadership ranks who's willing to be vulnerable. It's one thing to say we have the Be Nice resources available to you, but it's another thing for that leader to step forward and say, I'm struggling with this, and here's how I dealt with it. So if you can find that advocate within your organization, take advantage of it, because that one person can be the seed to make big change.
I would kind of echo John there as well. I think it comes from the leadership, whether it's the top person, or you find somebody on that upper level management that's willing to be vulnerable, talk about it. Obviously having the resources would Be Nice, the posters, the material, the stuff that you can pass out is a nice way to make it a prominent fixture in your business. But really it's having the people being willing to talk about it and talk about their vulnerability.
And I think if you're not in a specific leadership position, lead by example. Start that conversation yourself. And I think too, it's challenging in a business environment sometimes to know where the line is of, well, how vulnerable can I be, or am I saying too much? Am I divulging, too much information about this? The takeaway would be honest with yourself and about how you would want someone to act if you were on the other side of that conversation. So yeah, lead by example, and again, like how to figure out how you can define what creating a moment that matters looks like.
Vulnerability and courage, something all three of you have displayed this afternoon for us up here. So I want to thank you all three of you, and hope that something they were able to say today resonated with you that you can take back with you to your workplace. So